All right, I think we'll go ahead and just get started with the introductions, and if anybody joins later, that's fine. We'll go ahead and get started with, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, which is Cannabis 2019. My name is Aisha, and I'll be your moderator today. I am the Assistant Director of the Illinois Higher Education Center for Alcohol, Other Drug, and Violence Prevention here at Eastern Illinois University, and I'm very excited to host this event today. Before I hand over the microphone, though, I have a few housekeeping items to cover about today's GoToWebinar platform. For those of you that are new to using GoToWebinar, we do have a control panel that you should be able to see off to the right of your screen. This is where you will find the question box, be able to put in any comments or anything that you would like us to answer or read. Also, if you have any technical problems, please go ahead and send me a message through that, and I'll see if I can help you. All attendees will be muted for today's program during the webinar, and that doesn't mean you can't participate. You can raise your hand or leave a message, and you can interrupt at any time if you'd like to speak or add to the conversation. Also, please type those in, and we will be addressing those during the webinar today. Most of the time we do it at the end, but today we're going to have more of an interactive. So if you have something Randall would like to know and be able to address it right then. So please don't hesitate to type in your questions, and we will get to those. Make sure everyone gets their questions answered today. Let's see. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, which is Randall Webber. He is currently the Director and Principal Consultant at JRW Behavioral Health Services. It's a Chicago-based behavioral health training and consultation agency. He also is an instructor at the professionally approved CADC School at Behavioral Services in Skokie, Illinois. He has worked in the addiction field for past 40 years as a counselor, prevention worker, program director, and a trainer. So with having said all that, let's go ahead and turn it over to Randall and start today's webinar.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Many of you know that cannabis and humans have been interacting for thousands of years. There is evidence of humans having contact with cannabis before written records. Archaeologists have found cannabis buried with individuals before prehistoric times, tens of thousands of years ago. We know from the historical record that humans have used cannabis recreationally and medically for thousands of years. I just have to take a minute and make sure that my slides are moving. There we go. I wanted you, just for a little bit of a context, before marijuana was banned in the United States in 1937, it was illegal in many other countries. This goes back to the 14th century in the Mideast. But in the 1800s, Greece, South Africa, Jamaica, Canada, and Mexico all illegalized marijuana before the United States. Then in 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was created, which illegalized marijuana in the United States and paved the way for marijuana laws up until the present day. In the 1990s, various different states began to legalize marijuana for medical use. California, Oregon, and Washington were the first of those. Then in 2012, California and Washington legalized recreational marijuana. In 2013, Illinois legalized medical marijuana. And in 2019, as you're aware, Illinois legalized recreational marijuana. And on January 1st, marijuana will be legal recreationally. It will be able to be purchased at licensed outlets but other individuals, private individuals, and non-licensed facilities will not be able to sell it. A little bit very quickly about cannabis in general. Cannabis is a plant that originated in Central Asia and Africa, spread through trade to other parts of the world, including Europe, and then spread to the New World through the people who came over from Europe beginning in the 15th century and going forward. There are various different species of cannabis. These are the two that we find in the United States. Cannabis sativa is now indigenous to the United States. Cannabis indica has been introduced within the last 30 to 40 years, and it's primarily grown cultivated and grown by individuals who are cultivating it for sale and for personal use. These two species are relatively the same. Cannabis sativa has a reputation of being a little bit more stimulating, cannabis indica of being a little bit more sedating. But these qualities are not very, very strong. They're just mild tendencies of the two different plants. Within cannabis, there are over 100 different cannabinoids. The psychoactive ingredient, as many of you are aware, is delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. Another cannabinoid that is prominent within cannabis is cannabidiol, CBD. And many of you have heard of CBD. It is sold legally because it's not psychoactive. You can find it in online, in stores, at gas stations, just about everywhere. And recently, analysis of the CBD that has been sold commercially has shown that it has varying different levels of CBD present, the products at various different levels of CBD, some containing virtually none, others containing a large amount, some even containing some amounts of THC. So cannabidiol is unregulated at this time, and you can never be sure exactly what you're getting. We also have internal cannabinoids that are manufactured by the human brain. They're called endocannabinoids, and because they are there naturally, there are receptors or docking sites in the brain for these endocannabinoids to attach. The CB1 receptor is where THC attaches. The CB2 receptor is where cannabidiol attaches. There are other aspects of these receptors as well. For example, stimulation of the CB1 receiver not only produces intoxication, but sometimes can produce anxiety and rarely transient psychosis. The CB2 receptor, when stimulated not only by CBD but by other cannabinoids, tends to have a more calming effect and tends to offset some of the anxious or unpleasant symptoms that THC could produce if it was used in isolation. And as we're going to find throughout this webinar, cannabis products increasingly have more and more and more THC in them, and they have been bred and created specifically, in some cases, to maximize THC and to minimize the amount of CBD, so that the marijuana and other cannabis products that we're seeing today are quite different from what has been available in the past. Cannabis hemp has been grown in the United States since colonial times. Hemp is a form of cannabis that has a very low amount of THC, but it's very strong, very fibrous. And so it's used to make rope, clothing, other textiles. During World War II, farmers were paid to grow hemp because of the war effort. And much of that hemp is still growing, but it does have low THC and so it is virtually useless to use for the purpose of intoxication. Cannabis flower or marijuana is what is smoked for intoxication. And on the left-hand side, you see a flowering top. The greatest amount of THC is in the flowering tops of the plants. In the middle, you see an actual flower top, a bud, that has been dried out. And if you look very carefully, you can see little white dots. Those are called trichomes. And on the right-hand side, there's an electron microscope image of the trichomes, which contain the THC and in fact psychoactive. Cannabis today ranges in potency from THC quantities in 5–6%, all the way up to varieties that contain up to 30% THC. So you can see that this is a wide range of THC, and therefore a wide range of intoxicating capabilities in cannabis. The marijuana that I smoked in the 1960s and 70s was very low potency. It's estimated that marijuana was anywhere from 2 to 4% THC, although at times it got stronger, and we knew that we were getting good marijuana, good weed versus low quality. But the strength of the marijuana never approached what we're seeing today available in medical marijuana dispensaries, legal dispensaries, and on the street. Hashish is the resin of the flowering tops removed from the plant and dried out. Therefore, because the resin contains the THC, hashish is a more concentrated form of cannabis. And so THC levels in hashish can range above 6% to 10 or 12% or even higher. But still, keep in mind that even hashish is not approaching the levels of THC in many of the available forms of street marijuana. Kief is a relatively rare type of cannabis. It is the dried out trichomes purified and smoked. You won't see this very often, but it is available in some medical marijuana dispensaries and legal dispensaries, although not in great quantity. We move on then to the more powerful cannabis concentrates. This is a picture of hash oil, sometimes called honey oil. Hash oil is made by taking marijuana leaves, immersing them in a solvent, allowing the leaves to remain in the solvent for a period of time, removing the leaves, and then evaporating the solvent. After which you have a very syrupy, viscous, thick, dark reddish brown liquid that can be very, very high in THC. 40–50% or higher THC. So you can see that hash oil is a much more potent form of cannabis. And so now we're approaching the forms of cannabis that are nothing like what people smoked years ago, and even what people who smoke street marijuana are used to now. Shatter is another kind of cannabis concentrate. As you can see, it looks a little bit like plastic, very thin, has the consistency of a kind of a bendable plastic, and shatter can be up to 90% THC. Butter is very similar. It's another concentrate. It can be very, very high in THC. And then wax, just another concentrate. You can see by the forceps on the left side of the screen that this is very sticky. And there are specific types of implements and instruments that are used to smoke all of these different concentrates. So what are some of the desired effects of cannabis? Euphoria, a sense of well-being. Some people report that marijuana stimulates them, excites them, but certainly not to the extent of a drug like amphetamine or cocaine. But it gives them a sense of exhilaration. The person may want to try new things, experience new things, have energy. Marijuana can also be very relaxing. A large majority of people who smoke marijuana say that they do so in order to attain the relaxing effects, the sedating effects. They indicate that it relaxes them, reduces their anxiety. And we'll take a look at that anxiety reducing capability a little bit later, because just in the last few days, there's been some published medical research on the effects of marijuana on the treatment of mental disorder. Sometimes time seems to slow. There can be an intensification of sensory stimuli, so that food never tasted better, and a person will say, I heard something in that song or in that music I'd never heard before. There was an instrument in the background or something else I've never been aware of. And the senses seem to be very finely attuned. Hilarity and indiscriminate laughter, even ordinary things can provoke humor and laughing fits. It's interesting that this tends to occur during the early stages of marijuana use. It is less likely to occur during the later stages of marijuana use, almost as if with increased use, the funniness goes away. Other people will report increased libido, that they feel a higher sex drive and that they enjoy sex more under the influence of marijuana. Of course, there are people that feel the opposite way too. Just like all drugs, cannabis is very subjective. Some of the undesired effects, short-term memory impairment, and this is classic. A person might, they might, what was I talking about? Lose track in the middle of a sentence of what they were talking about, not being able to remember information that was just given to them. For example, they go to the internet and find the phone number of the pizza parlor, and the minute they turn away from their computer, they don't know the phone number. The short-term memory impairment seems to be temporary, but we'll take a closer look at that a little bit later. Impaired verbal skills and communication. Naturally, if you can't remember what you just said, it's very difficult to communicate effectively. And people do suffer from inability to explain themselves and to express ideas. Depression can be an effect of marijuana. Some people smoke marijuana because they are depressed and they say it alleviates their depression. Other people say that when they smoke, particularly if they are already depressed, the drug makes them more depressed. Anxiety is a possible side effect. And as I'll mention several times during the webinar, this is more likely with high THC levels, particularly if the CB2 receptor is less stimulated. In other words, if the marijuana is bred to have a high level of THC, but a low level of the cannabinoids to stimulate that CB2 receptor, anxiety may be more prevalent. Mental clouding, just a feeling of your head being stuffed with cotton, confusion, difficulty thinking clearly, panic, more likely with number one, high THC levels, and secondly, younger age. Adolescents, of course, are emotionally less stable than adults, and so they're more prone to these unpleasant side effects, including panic, and rarely people experience hallucinations and delusions. Marijuana is not a hallucinogenic drug. These are very uncommonly seen but I have to mention them because they do occur in some cases. And that may be an indication that the person has a predisposition for psychiatric illness. Excuse me. What I wanted to get into now is research that was published by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine in 2017. And this was really a groundbreaking publication because the National Academies, which were established in 1863 to advise the federal government on issues related to, as you see, science, engineering, and medicine, is the primary agency that provides information to Congress and to other entities of the federal government. And in 2017, they embarked on a meta-analysis of the available marijuana research. This is to say that they gathered all the available marijuana research. Of course, they went through it and looked at the studies uh, uh, that produced better evidence, that were weaker. They separated the two. They looked at everything and they came up with certain conclusions. And what I'm going to do here is read the literal language that was in the report and then what I think the takeaway is. And so we have an association between cannabis smoking and worse respiratory symptoms and more frequent chronic bronchitis episodes. The takeaway, marijuana smoking most likely causes breathing problems and bronchitis. And this really makes sense. It's common sense that if you inhale something into your lungs, a type of smoke, that it's probably not going to have very beneficial effects. And by the way, when people say that marijuana is harmless, this is a good place to start. In over 40 years of teaching street drug pharmacology and talking to people ranging from junior high age up through adults, I have not met one person who will dispute that smoking marijuana may have negative effects on breathing. So this is a good foothold in case somebody is absolutely convinced that marijuana is um, totally safe. Okay, excuse me. Moderate evidence. And throughout this report, the academies will use words like moderate evidence, insubstantial evidence, um, and um, other words that qualify the statements that they're making. And as we go forward, you'll see that some of these statements are a little confusing, and that's why I give you the takeaway. So, moderate evidence for cessation of marijuana smoking and improvements in respiratory symptoms. If you quit smoking dope, your breathing problems could get better, but it is not guaranteed. No statistical association between cannabis smoking and the incidence of lung cancer. There is no evidence of the connection between smoking marijuana and lung cancer. And this is surprising to many, many people because it's known that marijuana contains carcinogenic chemicals. However, there is also evidence that marijuana may contain antioxidants, which protect the body against some of the potentially negative effects of cannabis. And so this is one that I think is very important. Problems with respiration and breathing, bronchitis, yes. Lung cancer, probably not. No statistical association between cannabis use and the incidence of head and neck cancers. This would be, for example, cancer of the tongue or of the mouth or other places in the head and neck. No evidence of connection between smoking marijuana and those cancers either. Limited evidence, and here we have another qualifier. This is only limited evidence of a statistical association between marijuana smoking and a particular kind of testicular cancer. Why this kind of cancer when the others don't seem to be associated with marijuana use? I don't know, and I don't know anybody that does know. Remember, this is also limited evidence. And there has not been an increase in the incidence of testicular cancer over the years. And so there is no epidemiological actual human experience increase in this type of cancer, and yet there's limited evidence that there may be an association. Limited evidence of an association between occasional cannabis smoking and an increased risk of developing COPD when controlled for tobacco use, which means that tobacco was taken out of the picture. Some people smoke weed and they smoke tobacco too, and we have to remove tobacco from the picture in order to make sure that we're seeing what the association may be between cannabis and whatever the disorder is. Limited evidence of this association. Even if people don't smoke tobacco, there's a possibility that they develop COPD, and perhaps in the future we'll know more about that. Now here we have insufficient evidence, and here it gets even more complex. Insufficient evidence to support or refute the association between cannabis smoking and asthma development or asthma exacerbation, making asthma worse. The takeaway is unknown whether marijuana smoking either causes or worsens asthma. We just don't know. There's insufficient evidence, as the slide says. Insufficient evidence of marijuana smoking and these different types of cancer and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It's just unknown whether marijuana causes those illnesses. There's just a paucity of data. There isn't much information on the effects of cannabis and cannabinoid-based therapeutics on the human immune system. We don't have enough research to say one way or the other. This addresses the issue of whether people who smoke marijuana have weakened immune systems and then are more likely to develop diseases or disorders, and if they do, be able to fight them off. Also insufficient evidence to draw conclusions about the effects of cannabis smoke or cannabinoids on immune competence. Not enough research to say, and this whole slide basically says, we don't know what marijuana does to the immune system. More research needs to be done. Limited evidence, and here again the qualifier is limited evidence to suggest that regular exposure to cannabis smoke may have anti-inflammatory activity. This is probably related to CBD and the CB2 receptor. So the anti-inflammatory property appears to be separate from the intoxicating property of marijuana, raising the possibility that medications could be developed or cannabis could be used to treat inflammation. For example, rheumatoid arthritis, tendinitis, other inflammatory diseases or disorders. Insufficient evidence to refute or support a statistical association between cannabis, cannabinoid use, adverse effects on immune status in people with HIV. If you have HIV and you smoke marijuana, is it going to compromise your immune system? This is clearly a disorder that is characterized by a vastly compromised immune system. Right now, we don't know whether people with HIV get their immune system gets worse or what happens. But we will find out that HIV status is one of the medical conditions that allows a person at this point to obtain a Illinois medical marijuana card. We'll stop in just a minute and see if there are any questions. Let me just finish this section briefly. Smoking cannabis during pregnancy is linked to lower birth weight in the infant. This is significant because a lower birth weight is the primary predictor of infant mortality, which is to say that more than anything else, low birth weight predicts the child may die before it reaches its first birthday. Now, many babies are born low birth weight. Low birth weight is anything under 5 pounds, 8 ounces. My wife was 5 pounds, 6 ounces when she was born, and she's perfectly fine. But as birth weight gets lower, then infant mortality goes up even more. And so one thing that we want as an outcome of pregnancy is a healthy baby that is of sufficient weight and size, and that will ensure, in many cases, the survival of the child. So this is very significant. And by the way, this is associated with smoking tobacco as well as using other drugs. The relationship between smoking cannabis during pregnancy and other pregnancy and childhood outcomes is unclear. Very recent research, and this is published within the last 5 days, shows that marijuana, particularly when mixed with alcohol, may produce at least some of the typical effects of fetal alcohol syndrome in animals. Now, it is unethical to give cannabis to a pregnant woman and then say, well, let's see what happens, because that is a cruel thing to do. And we never want to risk the health of the unborn and newly born child. But in animals, and I think that I have a slide at the very end of my presentation that illustrates this, there's some evidence that smoking marijuana may have more of an effect than just lowering birth weight. But in general, it's common knowledge that pregnant women should not be using any drug unless it is prescribed by their physician. Recent cannabis use impairs the performance and cognitive domains of learning, memory, and attention. So recent use can be defined as cannabis use within 24 hours of evaluation. And so there is an immediate and persistent, for at least 24 hours, problem in areas, different areas of learning and attention. We know about the problem with memory. There is also seems to be a problem with reading comprehension, paying attention to what's going on in the outside world. And but this really, the evidence is only within 24 hours. As many of you know, THC metabolites will remain in the body for days, weeks, or even months after the person ceases smoking. If an individual smokes every day, they can be positive for THC metabolites for up to 90 days. And so what we don't know, and this is relevant not only to learning, but also driving, is what happens in the person, what is the outcome, what is the effect 2 days, 3 days, a week, 2 weeks after smoking, particularly if the person is smoking heavily. A limited number of studies suggest that there are impairments in these cognitive domains in people who have stopped smoking cannabis. So a limited number of studies, we have that qualifier, but that some of these areas of cognitive functioning may not get better, or they might get better, but might not get back to where they were before. But we really don't know. There's not enough research to indicate one way or the other. But of course, we have to be concerned with marijuana smoking among people who are attempting to learn, having to pay attention. And again, I will go back to adolescence, and all evidence, as well as common sense and current thinking in neurology, suggests that you should not throw any drugs into the adolescent brain because it's a work in progress. Cannabis use during adolescence is related to impairments in subsequent academic achievement and education, employment and income, and social relationships and social roles. Teenagers who smoke marijuana have lower grades. They tend not to advance as far in their education. They are less commonly employed. Their income, and this appears to be throughout life, is lower than it is among people who do not smoke as teenagers. And there seems to be some impairment in social relationships and roles, which is a little vague, but still, there does seem to be some kind of a relationship there. The takeaway, as we said before, teens should not smoke marijuana, should not drink alcohol, or take other drugs as well. Cannabis use prior to driving increases the risk of being involved in a motor vehicle accident. Don't drive high, and that's a very good idea. Some people will tell you after repeated smoking of marijuana, after they have become accustomed to smoking marijuana and driving, that they drive just as well because they're aware that they're high, and so they're very careful. I had a doctor tell me one time, he lives in the Chicago area, and occasionally he goes to the Virginia Music Festival. And he said on the highway on the way home, I can always tell the difference between the drunks and the stoners. The drunks are going 90 miles an hour, and the stoners are going 35 miles an hour. So there may be a overcompensation for knowing that you're high and driving too slowly, too carefully. There is such a thing, you're going too slowly and not driving with attention. We'll look a little bit more at that in just a minute because they've looked at the instance of motor vehicle accidents and fatalities in states where marijuana has been legal for a considerable period of time. And so we'll get into that in just a minute. In states where cannabis is legal, there's an increased risk of unintentional cannabis overdose injuries among children. And one of the takeaways is that kids often find edibles, candies, brownies, cookies, beverages that contain cannabis products, and they eat them unaware that they contain cannabis. And in many cases may eat more than one dose. And so may have a strong reaction to the cannabis, unaware that they've taken a drug. And when people experience the intoxicating effects of a drug without realizing that they've taken one, it tends to produce a greater degree of mental distress than when they know that they've taken a drug. And just parenthetically, I have to tell you that one of the places that this was determined was in the CIA mind control studies in the 1950s, where people, both American citizens and others, were given LSD without their knowledge. And a certain portion of those people never returned to normal mental state. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is documented history. Okay, let's stop for just a minute and see whether we might have some questions.
Okay, we actually do have a couple questions for you. Um, One of them I'm going I'm going to skip to first because it seems to be about the pregnancy issue. We wanted to, the question is, Are there any negative effects that could be connected to edible THC use or CBD use in pregnancy?
Right now, it's unclear. We can assume that there probably is this effect on birth weight, uh, regardless of whether the cannabis is smoked or is ingested as an edible. But that's not for sure. CBD, there is no research at all on what the effect of CBD as an isolated cannabinoid is on pregnancy. And so that's something that right now is unknown.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Randall. Okay, the next question is about the legality of cannabis that's coming up in the new year. Um, One of the participants wanted to know if you had any suggestion for approaches or strategies that you would recommend for faculty, instructors, administrators, any of those roles in a community college setting on how to deal with students who are coming to school under the influence. What kind of strategies would you recommend to bring a greater awareness to the use, abuse, and misuse of cannabis?
I think that within the context of education on alcohol and other drugs, this is something that can be included there. Perhaps with legality approaching and soon upon us, um, there could be seminars, educational offerings that specifically address the question of legality and increased availability, so that people who now are more tempted to use because it's legal have more information about the things that we've been talking about today. Uh, I should say that right now there are several cases in court of students who have medical marijuana cards who have been penalized in college settings for smoking marijuana. For example, a young woman in nursing school. Apparently, there is a assumption or requirement that students in the nursing program will not smoke marijuana, and yet she has a medical marijuana card. At the same time, colleges that receive federal aid have to be aware that marijuana is illegal under federal law. And regardless of what the state law is, technically, it is illegal federally. And so, if a college receives federal funds, there may be a complication. So, I don't want to go too far afield in answering that question, but right now it's a very, very pertinent question, and one that is in part going to be decided in the courts.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, why is CBD oil very accessible? For example, why is it sold at Walgreens and CVS? Um, and what made that come about? Because it's kind of been exploding here.
Yes, it has been exploding. Um, CBD has become more available because there has been both increasing medical evidence and increasing publicity that said that CBD can be good for treating different disorders. There really is very little proof that CBD actually works to treat different disorders. There is one exception. I want to make note of this because it's important. CBD has been found to reduce the incidence of seizures in people who are prone to seizure activity. And this has become very famous and well known because some parents have children who have seizures 10, 15 times an hour, and their whole life is impaired by the incident of the seizures. And marijuana, and later it was it was narrowed down to CBD, is capable of stopping those seizures or reducing them significantly, perhaps from 10 seizures an hour to 1 or even 0. So the whole point is that there is a lot of potential in CBD, but right now we don't know exactly what it is, but it's unregulated, and so everybody who wants to make a buck is selling.
Okay, thank you for that answer. We have another one, which is how do you deal with coworkers who or workers who consume edibles in the workplace, even though it is legal? Will it affect work ethic?
That really depends on the individual. Some people who smoke marijuana are just as productive as they are if they haven't smoked or eaten it, because the question was in particular about edibles. Other people become completely dysfunctional and unreliable when they ingest cannabis products. And so that's really, it depends on the individual, and we haven't had that much experience. Um, some employers will stop testing for marijuana as a pre-employment requisite. In Colorado, many employers have said if they do test for marijuana, they will not be able to find enough workers to fill the positions that they have. But other agencies and organizations, particularly those that employ people in safety sensitive positions, or again, who receive federal funding, will continue to test. And so that's something that we will find out in the future.
Okay, I have one last question before we move on. It's more of an opinion question for you. Do you believe that recreational marijuana should be legal or illegal based on the research that we have out there now?
I think that we have insufficient research to really make an informed decision about that. And so right now I'm relatively neutral. I will say, I'll stick my neck out enough to say that I don't think we should be imprisoning people for possessions of small amounts of marijuana.
All right, I appreciate you answering those questions. And that's all I have right now.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on a little bit. Um, we talked about some of the research that's been done on marijuana. And one of the things that is important to understand is that marijuana for research is only available from our marijuana fund. And I did say our marijuana fund because it's owned by the federal government. And if you pay taxes, you have a little piece of that fund. But only marijuana grown in that farm in Oxford, Mississippi is available for research, and the marijuana averages about 6% THC. And so there is a discrepancy between the research marijuana and the marijuana that's being found on the street and in dispensaries. And so previous research has been really kind of uncontrolled in a sense, and has used generally low potency marijuana, and hopefully that will change in the future because the federal government has loosened up its rules on who can obtain marijuana. For years, it was very difficult for anyone to obtain marijuana, and so marijuana research went nowhere. But there's been an explosion of research in recent years. So, but this is just something to be aware of. Okay, because we have a limited amount of time left, I'm going to hit the high points here. The Illinois Compassionate Use of Medical Cannabis Pilot Program. A person can get a medical marijuana card. A physician certifies that a person has a qualifying condition. The physician does not write a prescription for the drug, simply certifies the person as a qualifying condition, and then the person goes through a series of steps as they apply to the Illinois Department of Public Health to get their medical marijuana card. One of the patients can get, people who are designated as patients can purchase and possess medical marijuana, as can designated caregivers, who, for example, would be someone who acts on behalf of an individual who has multiple sclerosis or another disorder that limits their mobility or their capability of obtaining and using medical marijuana. These are the conditions, and I'm not going to go through each one of these, partially because I don't know what all of these are, but we have here glaucoma, cancer, AIDS, hepatitis C, Lou Gehrig's disease, muscular dystrophy, severe fibromyalgia, and there are very few really objective tests or signs that can actually use to diagnose fibromyalgia, so that's a relatively loose kind of diagnosis. A variety of different conditions, some of which are extremely painful, or spinal conditions that can produce severe pain. Rheumatoid arthritis is here, traumatic brain injury, including post-concussive syndrome for people who have received a TBI through a concussion. And lupus, and residual limb pain, phantom limb pain. Sometimes when people have a limb or appendage amputated, they still continue to feel pain, even though the limb is not there. And opioids and other painkillers are ineffective in treating that pain. Marijuana can be, a person with that problem can be certified and can receive medical marijuana. Seizures, PTSD, and also people who are on opioids for relief of pain can now switch to medical marijuana. And this is obviously an attempt to battle the so-called opioid epidemic. And so this is a provision that has been added relatively recently. This, as you can see, Journal of Clinical Medicine within the last 10 days. Medical marijuana in older adults. Older adults may benefit from cannabis treatment for these various different symptoms. And by the way, one of the questions was, will you have access to these slides? And you will. And the last slide I'm going to show you has my website on it, and I will post these slides on my website. We really don't know much about the way that marijuana is capable of helping older adults who have medical problems. But the brief research that was done indicated that almost 85% of older adults who were treated with cannabis for various different disorders did report some degree of improvement in their general condition. So a person can get 2.5 ounces of medical marijuana every 14 days, 5 ounces a month. Nobody can smoke or use that much marijuana. And so there are people, in all honesty, who will buy medical marijuana more than they can use, and they'll sell it on the black market. When it becomes legal, that may decrease because, of course, people will be able to obtain it under the law. And when marijuana becomes legal, keeping track of time, some things that will occur in addition to marijuana simply becoming illegal, there will be some other effects. One of them is expungement of nearly 800,000 cannabis convictions, primarily people who have been convicted of possession of small amounts of marijuana. Their convictions will be expunged, and hopefully the effect that that's had on their life will be reduced or mitigated in some way. The other thing is that when legal marijuana dispensaries are established, there is in the legislation provisions for promoting diversity in the largely white cannabis industry through grants and loans, by funneling tax revenue into minority communities impacted by the war on drugs, making sure that minority individuals receive a certain percentage of the licenses for social use, and also making loans available to minority business owners to try and level the playing field. So as of January 1st, adults 21 and older can possess marijuana and buy marijuana in licensed stores. They can buy up to 1 ounce of raw cannabis, up to 500 milligrams of cannabis infused products. So that would be for example, and this is a whole nother subject that we won't be able to even touch today. Marijuana oil is sold in vape cartridges, and you can attach those to a vaporizer and vaporize the cannabis oil. The amount of THC is going to be limited to 500 milligrams per purchase in a store. Now, whether those vape cartridges are hurting people, we don't know. The evidence looks like it is illegal, illicit, counterfeit vape cartridges made on the street that are associated with many of the medical problems and even fatalities related to vaping. And then 5 grams of cannabis product in concentrated form, so butter, wax, shatter, etc. Non-residents of Illinois can purchase 1/2 of that amount. What about problems since legalization? In Colorado, more emergency room visits, and edibles are less than 1% of all sales, but compromise the basis for 11% of emergency room visits. Many of the emergency room visits are children who consume their parents' cannabis. Some of them are people with mental illness who consume cannabis, and then their symptoms become worse. They're exacerbated. There is a syndrome known as cannabis hyperemesis. These are individuals who are smoking what appears to be high THC level marijuana, and they suffer uncontrollable vomiting, which will stop if they cease smoking marijuana. This is very, very new, but it's been noted in the medical literature sufficiently that it's not a once in a lifetime occurrence. Visitors to Colorado have about 50% higher rate of ER visits compared to residents. And it may be that people are entering Colorado, buying a lot of marijuana, not used to a high THC level, getting high, and then having medical problems. And then the higher the THC levels, the more likely it is a person will end up in an emergency room. Increases in auto accidents and fatalities are unclear. There has been an increase in petty crime in Colorado since legalization, and we can speculate that this might be people who simply, as is the case for alcohol and many other drugs, they just want some money to buy marijuana. JAMA Pediatrics, July 2019, indicated, according to national data, that adolescent experimentation frequent use has gone down in states that have legalized cannabis. And there has been no change in adolescent use in states that have legalized medical cannabis. And there's the citation from JAMA Pediatrics, and you can go and look at it for more information on that. Well, we have just about reached the end of our webinar. I just want to make a couple of points. One of them is that people do become addicted to marijuana. So that if you're looking at the American Psychiatric Association's DSM-5, the textbook of psychiatric disorders, cannabis use disorder is listed, and it is real. There are cannabis withdrawal symptoms. And let me go over some of those withdrawal symptoms: craving, feelings of anger, irritability, or aggressiveness, Many people report this, that the temper is very short when they are withdrawing from marijuana. Nervousness, anxiety, and sleep disturbances, either not being able to get to sleep or not being able to stay asleep. These are minor withdrawal symptoms compared to opioids, alcohol, benzodiazepines, and other drugs that have more severe withdrawal symptoms. But there are withdrawal symptoms. And people who say there is no such thing as being addicted to marijuana or having withdrawal symptoms are actually mistaken. Um, okay, I'm going to have to just pull through all of this, the last slide. Thank you for being here today. You can download these slides at my website, www.randallwebber.com. Look for resources and then workshop downloads. And I will put the slides there. They'll be there within a day. And I thank you for being here and for your attention.
Thank you, Randall. We appreciate you presenting to us today. I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. In about an hour, you should get a survey sent to you. And please fill those out. They are short, but we really appreciate your feedback. And we will also send out certificates within 7 to 10 business days. So you will receive those if you needed those and indicated that on your registration. You can also view this webinar on our iHeck website. And we appreciate you coming and look forward to having you at future events. Thank you so much.